All right, welcome everyone. I am here today with Dr. Roberts, and I am really glad that you have agreed to talk to me about the flu shot because I plead guilty. I don't get the flu shot. I don't give my kids the flu shot, and to be honest with you, I'm painfully ignorant on the topic. And I'm wondering if you can help answer some questions and clear things up to me so that I can make a more informed decision about whether or not I want to get the flu shot.
Absolutely, I'd be happy to.
Awesome. Okay, so one of my first concerns about the flu shot is I heard that getting the flu shot is actually giving you the flu.
That's a really valid concern. I think that makes perfect sense for you as a person and as a mother. You wouldn't want to give yourself or your kids something that could be harmful, right? And as your doctor, I wouldn't want to do that either. In fact, I took an oath when I graduated from medical school that I would first do no harm, right? And so, very common misconception, but I think I can answer your question quite simply with a no. You cannot get the flu from the flu shot. It's theoretically impossible.
And how is that the case?
Because the flu shot is not a live vaccine. It's not even a killed vaccine. It's what we call a recombinant vaccine. So it relies on newer technology that's DNA based. And I can explain what those terms mean if you'd like me to.
Yeah, please. So the difference between a live vaccine, a dead vaccine, and what we use now.
Sure. So, the very first flu vaccinations came about 100 years ago after the great Spanish flu pandemic that killed scores of millions of people. They were very crude technologies, but a major advance in public health. So they would actually grow live cultures of the whole flu virus particle in animals or other tissues, right, like mice or the eggs of chickens. And then they would, inoculate a small needle into that live culture full of the virus particles and push that under the skin of the person receiving the vaccine. So that person was literally being given the flu, right? Not in the traditional way that most of us catch the flu, which is through our respiratory system. Mm-hmm. And so their symptoms were slightly different, right? They didn't have a lot of the cough and headache and runny nose that most of us experience when we get the flu, but they did have the muscle aches and the fevers and those other symptoms, right? Some of the gastrointestinal symptoms. But it was typically more of a mild case. And if that person was exposed to a person who actually had the respiratory flu later on, they were immune, right? Which was the whole point of the exercise. So this was first done in the army and other places where you have a captive audience, right? But once it was demonstrated that this was safe, it was effective, it became widespread, right? It was routinely recommended. Sooner, a little bit later, people realized that was maybe not a great idea to give people a living virus. Yeah. And so somebody had this insight that, what if we destroyed the particle? And, what if we exposed it to some harmful chemicals or we boiled it, right, to make the little flu virus particle, fall apart. And we showed that to the immune system in the form of a shot. And this was the birth of the true flu shot, right, a fluid in a syringe that goes into your body. And so this is what we call a killed vaccine, right? So it's all the same parts, but they're destroyed, either through being exposed to boiling water, formaldehyde, or ethanol.
But it was still effective.
Absolutely, and much safer, right? So the people wouldn't have the flu, right? They would have some of the same symptoms at the injection site, right? Redness and swelling and pain, similar to what we get now, but not the true flu illness, unless a few of those viral particles manage to escape that destruction process, right?
But even that isn't what we use today, though.
No, it's not. So that was much safer and just as effective, and it was the standard of care for decades, right? Until the genomic revolution, right? When we started to understand that DNA is the common language that all life shares. And we decoded the DNA sequences of the flu genome, right? So the flu has just a short string of different genes that code for its various parts, right? A virus is a very simple, minimalist organism. It's essentially the perfect parasite, right? It has just enough genes to get into your body and hijack your body's own cells to make massive amounts of itself, right? New viral particles. And so, for example, the influenza vaccine or virus has two major, what we call Trojan horse proteins located on the outside of its shell. And then it has the shell, and then on the inside is its genome, right? A piece of DNA or RNA in this case. And so it's a very simple thing. And so we know that if we can show the body those Trojan horse proteins, what we call the H and N proteins, right? You've probably heard of things like the H1N1 virus, right? Those refer to specific proteins found on the surface of the virus particle. that trick your body into thinking it's something interesting, right? That take it into itself, and then it's got you, right? It inserts its DNA into your cell, and that cell is going to it's going to die, right? That cell is going to be hijacked to become nothing more than a virus-producing factory. And when your body's immune cells discover that that cell has been hijacked, they trigger it for apoptosis, or programmed cell death, right? So suicide, to stop the spread of the infection. So what we do now with our recombinant vaccine technology is we take the DNA for those viral particles, H and N, and we put that little piece of DNA inside a vector, usually a chicken egg embryo, right? And we co-opt that embryo to make massive amounts of those H and N proteins. And then we purify those proteins, and that's what goes in the shot.
Oh.
So knowing this, that you're only seeing the H and N proteins, does that make sense why it's impossible to get the flu from the flu shot?
It does, but what else goes into the vaccine? Is there any mercury involved or anything like that?
That's also another very good point. So certain doses of the flu vaccine come in what we call a multi-dose vial, right? So where you draw multiple doses for dozens of people from the same vial. And in those vials, they do require a little bit of preservative. And as part of that preservative cocktail, there are some mercury-containing chemicals. Mercury is a natural element found in nature, right? There are certain forms of it that are toxic to us, certainly. And we know those forms, right? And we would never put harmful amounts of those forms of mercury in something that we're going to give to a person. So yes, while there is mercury in those multi-dose vials, in the single-dose vials, there is not, right? Those don't require preservative.
How often are the different vials used? Or how do you know if you're getting a multi-dose vial or a single-dose vial?
It depends on, the age of the patient who's receiving the vaccine, the maker of the vaccine. There are only a handful of actually pharmacologic companies that make the flu shot every year. And I can talk about how they choose which strains to go in, right?
How do you even know how to make the flu shot? What are you injecting into me?
Right. That's a very good question. So you probably heard things like, I've heard that the flu vaccine varies in its effectiveness from year to year, right?
Well, yeah, exactly. Because that's the point. If I'm going to inject myself with something, I want to have a good chance that it's actually going to do something, right?
Absolutely.
So how does that work?
We want it to be both safe and effective.
Yes.
So the important thing to remember here is that when it's summer here in the Northern Hemisphere, it's winter somewhere, right? It's flu season somewhere else. And so the CDC, Centers for Disease Control in Atlanta, has good partnerships with other similar organizations in places in the Southern Hemisphere, right? Places like Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, Chile, Argentina, and they share information, right? So when it's our summer and it's the height of flu season in the Southern Hemisphere, those organizations are sharing data back and forth. They're telling us, which strains of the flu are they seeing that are causing the majority of disease. The CDC graciously accepts that information and shares in turn when it's our turn. And then they put all that information into these complex mathematical algorithms that predict human migration, based on things like shipping lanes and cruise ships and air travel, and all of these other these other things that go into the formula. And it gets better and better with every year, right? It's not a silver bullet. It's not a crystal ball, right? This is the cutting edge of science, but there's no way to know with 100% certainty which strains are going to come north when it's our turn. We have to rely on statistics. So
like percentage-wise, what would it be like for me to be like, oh, how effective is this going to be? Do you have like a percent?
So on average, the effectiveness, meaning, the correlation between the strains that are chosen to go in the vaccine ahead of that flu season and the ones we actually end up seeing is pretty close. I'd say on average it's about 75% effective, right? Which means that some years are better and some years worse. A few years ago, there was a pretty rough year, right? Where the correlation between the ones we saw and the ones we were prepared for was only about 25%. The 25% is better than zero. And zero is the percent chance you have of being immune if you don't get vaccinated.
So, but if I do get vaccinated, then what are some of the side effects that I could expect from being injected with this?
Absolutely. So typically the side effects are localized to where you get the injection. Things like redness, soreness at the site of the injection, pain, low-grade fever. Those are typically mild and temporary, 2-3 days at most, and usually respond really well to things like ice, ibuprofen, and rest. The chances of having a more severe reaction, like an anaphylactic reaction, severe pain, or a more rare complication like a Guillain-Barré ascending paralysis or death, right, from the flu shot is incredibly small. I mean, your chances of winning the lottery or being struck by lightning are better.
Okay.
Sorry.
So if I'm getting the flu shot, or let's say I forgo the flu shot, be like, I don't want to worry about any side effects. I'm really healthy. And I mean, I don't really get sick that often anyway. Why do I need to get the flu shot?
I hear that a lot. That is probably the most common response that I get from my healthy young patients who just they don't understand why I'm recommending it, right? And you're right? If you got the flu, it would be, a couple weeks of misery, right? If you've been sick recently, if you had the flu recently.
Yeah, I actually did get the flu this season, and I did not get the flu shot. So I'm very curious.
Yeah, so you probably remember it was, 2 weeks of, you felt like you were going to die, right?
Yeah, it was brutal.
Yeah, so high fevers, muscle aches, it's pretty rough. But, you're young and healthy, so you probably will bounce back pretty quickly, right? The tricky thing about the flu and the important thing to remember is it's a highly evolved thing, and it is evolved to continue to spread, right? If every person who got flu on the day they got sick, they started to have symptoms, they would isolate themselves, right? And they would prevent other people from coming in contact with them. And in some sense, the virus knows this, right? It doesn't have a brain, it can't really know it, but it's evolved a mechanism to get around that. And that mechanism is that when you are exposed, there's actually a lapse in time between when you are contagious and when you start to develop symptoms. And it's during that time that you are shedding or spreading that virus.
So for a couple of days, I could be spreading the virus without even knowing I even have the virus in the first place. And I could be giving it to someone far more vulnerable than myself.
Exactly. So someone who is younger, older, whose immune system is not really up to snuff, on chemotherapy or on some sort of medication for a problem like arthritis or Crohn's disease, right, where their immune system is being suppressed. Those are the people who get very, very sick from the flu, right? People who end up in the hospital, people who die from the flu. And God forbid if that should happen and you were the one who gave them that, in a way you are indirectly responsible for their illness and death.
So what I'm hearing is it's not just about vaccinating myself, it's about creating this kind of vaccinated environment in which to protect the vulnerable members of your tribe.
Exactly. It's about being a good steward of the public health, right? In epidemiological terms, we have a word for that or a term for that, and that's herd immunity, right? So when we have a very healthy immune herd, they create a sort of shield, a protective barrier around those few in our midst who are vulnerable or unvaccinated or unimmune. And they protect, and prevent these large-scale outbreaks of things that are very contagious like the flu virus. To get that real immunity benefit, though, we have to have high levels of immunity and vaccination, levels above 75%, 80%. Unfortunately, we don't typically reach that in America. Most years we succeed in vaccinating about 50% of the adult population against the flu. But, that's pretty good. In a country of 350 million people, that's literally more than 100 million people who get the flu shot every year. And how many of them have a major serious reaction or die from the flu? On a given year, it's maybe 1 or 2. And while that's tragic...
How many people die of the flu?
Tens of thousands. Right?
Okay, so the chances of dying of the flu shot are significantly less than dying of the flu.
Not even in the same ballpark.
Not even in the same ballpark.
Right.
So I'm a mom. I have 3 kids. And while I am concerned with herd immunity, I'm more concerned about my individual children. So could you explain to me then, is there any differences in giving the flu shot to a healthy adult, someone like myself, and then my young children? I mean, I have a 12-year-old, a 9-year-old, and a 6-year-old. And then how young is too young to get the flu shot?
That's a great question. And it's changing, right? So with new vaccines coming on the market, the youngest age possible that we can give them is going down. And we have now different strengths available for different people at different ages, right?
Oh.
So the typical flu shot, what we call a quadrivalent shot, protects you from 4 strains of the virus. The CDC has identified these are our big 4 that we really want to make sure that most people get immunized against. For people who are 65 and above, we have what we call our high dose flu, which can be 12 to 15 strains. Those are people who are much more likely to be acutely ill and die from the flu shot. So we give them a broader range of protection.
And to clarify, not die of the flu shot, but complications associated with it?
Yes, thank you for correcting that.
Oh, I'm just asking. I don't know.
Right. So die of complications from the flu, correct.
Okay, gotcha.
And now there's even one in the middle that's approved for people who are 50 and older. It covers about 10 strains. Now, I haven't mentioned at all the flu mist, right? The nasal spray. That is truly a live vaccine, what we call a live attenuated vaccine. So it's been it's been weakened a little bit to produce a less vigorous kind of response. But it is truly a whole particle that we give to children to avoid a shot. Now, it's not available every year because it's very difficult to grow in culture. And so some years it just doesn't make it to market in time. And so in those years, we do use the shot for kids. But some years it is available. It's not a good idea if your child suffers from respiratory problems or asthma, though. You should still give them the shot. And in general, we recommend the flu vaccination for children as young as 6 months old. And if a mother is breastfeeding, to continue breastfeeding through that respiratory season is really important.
So then, when do you recommend I give my kids and myself the flu shot? If we're going to go get the flu shot, I want it to be effective. When do I do this?
That's a great question. Here we are kind of late in the flu season. It's not too late, right? We continue to see flu, cases pop up through April. But the ideal time to get your flu shot is early in the kind of fall, right? Okay. September, October, and that's typically when we get the flu shot in stock. And so I'd say, this year, if you decide to go ahead and take the plunge and get it yourself and for your kids, go to your doctor's office or pharmacy come late September, early October.
So what about for people who say, I already had the flu this season, so I'm going to be good the rest of the season?
Yeah, I wish it were so, but it is not. The flu, we are locked in an arms race with the flu, right? With the flu virus. It is constantly mutating, which is why we have to create a new flu vaccine every year, right? To kind of play catch up, cat and mouse with this flu virus. Now, there is real hope that at some point in the future, we will have what we call a universal flu vaccine. One flu vaccine that you can get either a single injection of or a series of as a child and develop lifelong immunity against all strains of influenza forever, right? That ever could be.
It's like super children immune to the flu.
Right. And when we have that, we will see the flu go the way of the dinosaur, go the way of smallpox, right? It will be eradicated in humans. I'd say that vaccine, while we're making important progress towards that, it's not ready for the limelight. It's still probably 10, maybe even 15 years away. But it definitely is something that we are working on, and I think something that we will see in our lifetime, a true universal flu shot, which is really exciting. Yeah. Until then, though, the annual flu shot is still our best defense against pandemic influenza.
So then my final question then I have to ask, while I trust the data and I'm trusting everything you're saying, but at the end of the day, I'm making these decisions based upon emotions. And what I need to know from you is, do you give your kids the flu vaccine?
Absolutely. I go in with them, actually. We all get it together.
Yeah.
Solidarity. So,
okay.
Yeah, every year. It's they cry and they complain, but it's the right thing to do.
Okay.
Right. As a father, I want them to be safe and I want to show a good example. And so we do it together.
Well, thanks so much for helping me understand the flu shot better.
Sure.
I was totally ignorant on the topic.
No, it's, and I think these are all really important questions, and I never want my patients to feel judged or condescended to when they have legitimate questions about the safety and effectiveness of a treatment I recommend. Now, I've gotten a lot of questions recently about, emerging threats, things like coronavirus, right? Which is a really hot topic right now. I think influenza still presents a much greater imminent danger to most of us than coronavirus. But, a lot of the same preventative strategies apply, right? So during this respiratory season, it's really important to practice good hand hygiene, right? If you're in public and, you come home, you should wash your hands before eating anything, before touching your face. You should try to avoid, concerts and sporting events if at all possible. The airport, places where germs are likely to be spread and come in from different parts of the world. If you feel that you are sick, you should avoid going to work that day, right? You should keep your children home if they're sick. You should seek urgent medical attention for fevers that don't respond to typical antipyretics, or if you or your child can't keep down enough fluids. These are all really important reasons to go seek medical attention. And when the CDC and if we get to the point where there is a pandemic info for vaccine against coronavirus or any pandemic illness for that matter that is available and recommended, you should get that, right? You should get that too.
Well, and I assume it has to go through rigorous testing, right?
Absolutely. So in fact, there is already some initial kind of phase 1 studies that are being done on coronavirus vaccination in particular. And so these phases are intended to make sure that the drug is effective, that it is safe, that it is dosed appropriately before it ever reaches, the mass market, right? Where we would give it routinely to people.
Okay.
And, these are people who have our best interest at heart, right? They want us all to be healthy. There's no conspiracy, right, to make us all sick or dumb by getting vaccines.
Right. Right. Well, thank you so much for your time. I already feel better about the flu shot.
Well, good. I'm glad to hear it. It's my pleasure.